Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am your host, Robert Santana, along with my co-host, Trent Jones.
That is me.
Today, we're going to talk about, well, a couple of things, mainly maintenance. Maintenance of your results in the weight room and in your diet, of course. And I think that also ties into, exercise versus training, because that all kind of relates,
Yeah.
Kind of under the same umbrella.
So, maintenance. There is an idea out there that one can train themselves to a particular level. Let's just make an example here. That a young man could train himself to a 315 squat for 3 sets of 5, which is a realistic possibility for a lot of young men doing the novice linear progression.
Yeah, a lot of middle-aged men too. Hell,
and middle-aged men.
Some older
that's
men.
not uncommon at all, right? To do that. But there's this idea. I just picked that number out of it's kind of random, but there's this idea that you could get to say that level and say, like, you know what? I'm squatting 3 wheels. I'm strong enough for life for whatever I want to do personally, and so I'm just going to hang out here. And I'm just going to stay this strong, and I don't really want to go any further. And there's this idea that you can simply go in, and I guess the thinking is, well, I'll just go in and squat 315 like every time I work out, and I'll just stay there because I'm not adding weight to the bar anymore, so I know I'm not going to get any stronger, but I'll just kind of hang out. And I'm going to maintain what I've got.
Right.
And are you telling me that's not correct? You can't do that?
No, the maintenance is bullshit. You're either getting stronger or getting weaker. And I know, some smart ass out there is going to say, oh, well, Robert, that's a false dichotomy.
Is that like the business thing where they're like, you're either growing or you're dying?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I've heard one guy say, you're either more of an alcoholic or less of an alcoholic. Yeah, a good friend of mine said his grandfather told him that years ago. And it kind of, when he said that, this was more recent, that's kind of how this topic was inspired, interestingly enough. We were just talking, and he mentioned that to me. And then I'm like, that just kind of goes back to what Rip said about maintenance being bullshit, which I've always agreed with. But I'm like, this is a much better way to put it. You're either getting stronger or you're getting weaker.
Yeah.
And, okay, it's a false dichotomy. So what? Prove it, first of all. You probably can't.
Right.
Because how the fuck do you measure that, right?
Right.
A false dichotomy. A false equivalence.
We know, so we like to talk about being coaches. We like to look at our field experience first and foremost. And we know what happens when you try to go in and you try to do the exact same thing day over day over day. You pretty much, what happens is that you can do 315 for 3 sets of 5. And, you could go in the next workout and do it again. And you do it again. And all of a sudden, it becomes like 315 for a couple sets of 5 and maybe like a set of 3 or set of 4. Like you start missing a rep, if you keep doing this. I don't know actually that many people who have actually tried to do that. But I've certainly seen this happen with on other lifts, like the press or the bench press. The people that will come to me and they're like, I just can't get any further. So they'd keep doing the same thing and then like reset and then run back up and then reset and run back up and reset and run back up and just forever and then never get any further. But this is a similar idea. Like eventually we know from experience, like it stops working. And in fact, you start sliding backwards.
I haven't thought about this in a long time because I've owned my own gym for 2 years and I trained at, serious lifting gyms for 5 years before that. But back in the Globo gym days and even at the first powerlifting gym that I went to, there's always that guy or handful of guys that goes in and, benches 225 or 315, works up to it, and then goes home. And the last guy I remember doing this was at the powerlifting gym, and the reason I remember him is because when you go to a lifting gym, or typically most sport-type facilities, sport and recreation places, which is not your commercial gym. Your commercial gym, people want to look in the mirror, sweat, not talk to anybody, and admire themselves and others. It's a meat market.
Catch a pump.
Yeah, I'm going to look at that, girl or guy over there with the nice body, or I'm going to look at my own body in the mirror, and, I don't want to talk to anybody unless they have something to offer me. It's a different environment, but in powerlifting gym, everybody talks to each other. So this guy I remember because we talked a lot, and he was, a real cool dude. And he never trained for powerlifting. It was a local gym. I think he lived in that area his whole life. And he was friends with one of the guys there that was a serious lifter. And we all used to just talk about this guy. Like, dude, if we can get this fucking guy to train, he'd be strong as piss, you know?
Right.
He would come in and he would work up to a 295 bench almost every single time. And then he would tell me, yeah, if I can get amped up, I'll get 315. And then sometimes he'd get 315, but he's like, I can't do that every time. So usually it was either 295 or 305.
Yeah.
And basically, that's just his baseline because he's never trained, you know?
Right.
He probably accidentally got there and it leveled off and stayed there. And then eventually age will cause muscle loss and then it'll turn into 255 probably at some point. Maybe it has now. It's been 7 years. I'm curious if he's still going in there and hitting 315, you know, or 305 or 295. But for the most part, if you take someone who's actually trained, it gets you to a point where, hey, you're either getting stronger or you're getting weaker. And so what is maintenance, right? Because do you want to train forever and, try to reach your genetic ceiling? I guess that's the question, right? And this is why I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I want to tie in exercise versus training, because that will help explain this concept of maintenance and where the question comes from, right? So we'll start with training. First of all, basic definitions. Training means you are trying to go from point A to point B. This can apply to those beautiful keyboards behind you or barbell.
Right.
Trent, the sound producer, the greatest sound producer in the world, has these awesome keyboards. One of them's lighting up behind him. But so, if you're playing an instrument, you're either getting better at that instrument through incrementally more challenging exercises or whatever you want to call them, lessons, music lessons, right? If you're going to become a better swimmer, you have to put in more mileage, more speed, or more resistance, through a pull buoy or put on fins. There's different ways to incrementally load that, right? In the weight room, you're adding intensity one way or another, So, even if you're doing high volume, eventually the intensity has to go up. These it kills me. These guys that are some of the most muscular men on the planet will sit there and promote volume, but then you look at what they're loading on the bar, and it's far more than their readers will ever lift.
Right.
So it's like you're missing the clear association here between strength and muscle mass. Sure, they may not beat Eddie Hall in strongman. They may not beat Ray Williams on the squat in powerlifting or, bench 700. But when you got a guy like Jay Cutler, Mr. Olympia, incline bench pressing 405 for 10, I think strength is part of the equation. And the guys that are arguing against this are probably benching 95 for 10. And it drives me crazy, So this became abundantly clear to me. And another big name in our industry, Lane Norton, he mentioned something similar. He, he's got gifted bodybuilding genetics, at least up top. He has capstone delts, pecs, back, nice upper body, but he's always struggled with lower body. And he, talks about this in various podcasts and publications. And the reason I like to bring him up is because what got me into strength training before I knew who he was that I looked around the gym one day and I'm like, these guys that, look jacked, like how I want to look, they're lifting way more than me. I got they come in, they do 225 on the bench for, 10 reps. They rep out 225 on the bench, or they're doing wide grip pull-ups to their chest, which I couldn't do. I can do a lot of pull-ups because of swimming, but if I had to do a wide grip in front of me, I could barely get my chin over it, let alone touch my chest with the damn thing. I'm thinking of this guy in the weight room back in college. I was 19, and he had big delts, big back, big pecs. And, he may or may not have been on shit, I don't know, but he would go in there and rep out wide grip pull-ups and touch his chest to the bar. Like I would have to go with like 60 pounds in the pull down at the time,
Right.
Now I could do a underhand and, do a chin up for, 8 to 10 reps at that time because I swam, so we had to do those.
Yeah.
But
you had the lats.
Yeah. So my whole point was, I looked around and, nobody pressed, so I can't really give you a metric there. But typically I saw guys with big upper body musculature, benching 2 plates, probably doing some heavy chin-ups, heavy dips, and, they were curling a bunch of weight, probably over 100 pounds. And, one day it just finally dawned on me. This was probably around 2012. I looked around and I'm like, I can't rep out what these guys were repping out, And that's when it, kind of dawned on me. Then my friend, who I'd been programming at the time, said, "You're giving me bullshit programs that don't work," give me something that works, and I've talked about this in other episodes, and I just thought back about, Arnold and the old days. They would just, hit heavy powerlifting and Olympic lifting, and then eventually they'd get strong enough and they'd have to do quote unquote hypertrophy workouts to basically not throw out their back, elbows, and knees,
Right.
Because, Arnold had a 705 squat and a 575 deadlift and a, bench in the mid fours, and he's a long limbed guy. So that's, pretty good for his anthropometry, but he ain't going to squat, 3-4 times a week and, get that type of muscle pump these bodybuilders want. 'Cause remember, it's all appearance. So,
right.
some of this stuff is just being pumped up all the time and fluid retention. So yeah, they're going to do knee extensions and shit, but
that's right. Yeah.
When you have a 600 squat, okay, go do your knee extensions. You can't squat all the time,
Exactly. Like clearly at some point there's a difference in adaptation between like the power lifter who's going pure, like his sport is purely as high intensity as you can get. Mm-hmm. And then the bodybuilder who's going for a muscular look that involves, greater like sarcomere expansion, or for lack of a better term, right? They're going for like hypertrophy by getting more water and glycogen into that muscle to make it look bigger and fuller, and then get a pump on top of that. Okay, yeah, there's going to be some sort of difference in training and adaptation to the type of training that they're doing. But we're talking about people who are, from a strength training perspective, advanced.
Well, let's qualify that. Though. We're talking about a very small difference.
Yeah, right. Yeah, to your point, like how many guys, let's see, Arnold in competition shape was what, 250?
260, about 260. Ronnie was 290, 300.
All right, so if we look at the 242 and the 275 powerlifting weight classes, how many guys that are at a reasonably high level are, like, what are they squatting? 700? Would that be a decent squat for a
yeah,
I think so.
800. Ed Cohen, I think raw was in the 700 or 800s, at 220.
Right. So it's not like he's that far off from these, elite specialists in the strength world.
Yeah, no. And this kind of gets lost too. And then you also got to ask yourself, how many guys that are reading this stuff, are over 200 pounds and jacked? We're talking about a minority. When you go into like natural bodybuilding, whatever that means, either right. means light drugs or no drugs,
Right.
The biggest weight class in that sport, last time I looked this up, could change since then, but it was 165 pounds, because there's not a lot of guys on this planet that are over 200 pounds and completely ripped. I mean, they're there, and we have billion, right. 8 billion people on the planet? Is that where we're at now, world population?
Yeah, sure.
Something like that. So yeah, you may have seen these guys like, no, I saw this guy and there's this gym I go to where there's a handful. Okay, well, we're talking about in relation to the population of the world. They are in the minority. It's not like every other person you see is 200 plus and ripped, Right. And when you especially when you remove drugs from the equation, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for the people reading fitness publications, most of these people have trouble gaining muscle. They're not people that come out the gate, strong. Like, I knew a guy who was real jacked. He owned a powerlifting gym here in town that I trained at, and he was a minor league catcher. And he told me his first deadlift was 475. And I believe it,
Yeah,
he was
sure.
And this guy, was sitting at 225 when he was powerlifting and ripped, visible abs, probably like definitely sub 15% body fat. I'd say probably 10 to 12 range most of the time,
Right, yep.
And he was a very gifted athlete, very explosive, and he could press 315 without training the press,
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
There's people out there.
These people are out there. But my point is, most bodybuilders that are competitive typically have good genetics for bodybuilding. Rip has said it many times. I agree with it. It's about 90% genetic, maybe 95. It's not just muscle mass. They have a lot
right.
of muscle mass out the gate, but they also have tight skin, so the muscles look tighter. They have good muscle insertion, so where the muscle inserts on the bones and joints will dictate how that muscle appears, because remember, it's an appearance sport, right?
Right, yep. Yeah, I've also noticed a lot of them, maybe all of them, have rather small joints. Like if you look at their elbows and their knees, like they're kind of small. And it gives the appearance of the same size muscle looks bigger relative to a small ankle. The calf looks bigger. On the other hand, you see these guys who are like the real big, heavy benchers, and their freaking elbows. I'm not talking about the muscles around, just their elbow joint is like the size of my knee. It's just huge.
Well, you look at, I like to take someone that's probably closer to, your average Joe, I suppose, but also gifted for that sport. This would have been Frank Zane. He competed at, I don't know, 185, I think, and he was 5'9". And that would never get him to Mr. Olympia today, but it did in the 70s, early 80s. And, he was 185 on stage. I think he was like 200 off season. He had visible abs year round. So probably went from, 12% body fat to 5% body fat or something like that, or maybe 10% to 5% because he was just a naturally lean guy, right? And, he was probably on testosterone and D-ball or whatever the hell they took back then. He was probably on drugs like the rest of them, mild compared to the bodybuilders of today. But back then, he weighed what, 175? And I think he deadlifted 425. He bench pressed 285. And he squatted 400. And he can curl 155. Now, these aren't impressive numbers for powerlifting by any means, but he wasn't training for powerlifting. If he trained for powerlifting, I bet those numbers would be higher. But the point is, most of the guys that criticize strength and say, I don't need to get strong to build muscle, I need hypertrophy with my, 185 deadlift, they're not pulling 425, Not that I think 425 is heavy. I think most men can get there in their first 6 to 12 months of training if they do what the fuck they're supposed to do. 285 bench isn't that heavy. And, I think it's impressive that he was over 400 on the squat. And, when these guys are talking to and they're reporting these PRs, that could mean reps, that could mean singles. I don't know what he meant.
Right.
But
yeah,
a lot
exactly.
of those guys, since they didn't compete, I'm guessing that they either maxed out in the gym or, they did a few reps with that. So, the guy had some pretty good numbers. He was well over, if he was 175 and he was pulling 425, that's 2.5 times body weight, right?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Times 2.5. Let's do it. Yeah, he was just shy of 2.5 body weight deadlift. You know what I mean? Same with the squat. So he was doing 2.5 times body weight squat and deadlift, and he was a lean guy.
Yeah.
And the guys that are reading this shit and saying, I don't need to get strong, aren't anywhere near that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't want to go too much on a tangent on this. The main point here is training requires you to get from point A to point B. You are doing progressively more over time. You can do that for 5 reps. You can do that with singles. You can do that with 10s and 8s and 15s and 20s. I just had a lifter in my gym run the 20 rep squat program. As Dr. Bradford has said in the past, he failed the IQ test, but he did it. And it was of value to him because it taught him that he can keep going. And that was his problem on the heavy squats. So, it carried over. There's purpose to all this stuff. But the whole point is progression is what differentiates training from exercise. So now let's talk about exercise. What is exercise? Well, exercise is what my brother used to do. I'm going to go in the gym and hit 225 for, 3 to 5 sets of 5 or 275. Actually, he would switch back and forth. If he felt real lazy, he'd just do 225. But, basically I'm going to move some weight around so I can move some weight around and, I might hop on the treadmill for 20 minutes or, play some basketball with the, recreational team over there or, go for a jog in the woods or, ride a mountain bike or go hiking, and go on a real hard hike. And all those things are exercise. There's no progression. You're just going in to elicit an acute physiological response that's not intended to get you better at anything, right?
Right.
So
it is unstructured.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. You might go and like come up with a plan and have like a program written out for yourself, but if it doesn't actually move you forward from where you're at now to a higher point in the future, it's still exercise. You could choose it randomly, like you're talking about, like, well, maybe I'll play basketball today. Maybe I'll just go do some deadlifts today. Or you could go in and there's lots of people who have a plan. They've got a whole like sheet full of exercise that they're going to do in the gym, but they're still not training unless there is an overload, or just something to move you from point A to B, like you said. And I think, so to make sense of this, right, we've mentioned this a couple times in the podcast already, the SRA cycle, the stress recovery adaptation cycle. And that's just sort of our basic model that describes how progress actually takes place. Like, so when you do train, we know that it makes you stronger. Why? What's happening? Well, the lifting that you do in the gym in a training program is a sufficient stress to cause an adaptation. And then as long as there's the recovery piece in the middle, which is food and sleep, as long as there's sufficient recovery, you will adapt to that stress that you gave yourself. You will get a little bit more adaptation for whatever you stressed yourself with. So if you're lifting a heavier weight, you're going to get a little bit stronger. If you went a little harder on the Echo bike, you're going to get a little bit more condition. But we haven't really talked a lot about like what does that word stress mean specifically. And the main takeaway here is that stress means something that disrupts your homeostasis or that is above your baseline. You could think about it that way. In other words, your stepbrother, 275, let's say it was his baseline. Mm-hmm. Well, if he goes in and just does 275, is that actually a stress?
No.
If that is indeed the baseline, right? It's not, right? He's got to do 280 or he's got to do more reps or something that's going to disrupt his sort of baseline existence or his homeostasis, as we would say in biology terms. That's an important thing. That model works really well. It's not a perfect model, but it's a model. But it does describe the process of programming and training quite well.
Yeah, no, my brother, his baseline, 275 wasn't a 5RM. That was probably,
sure,
80%.
Probably higher than that.
Yeah,
if he pulled 405,
No, he's going to go in there and do something comfortable. So let's talk about exercise here. CrossFit has been referred to as competitive exercise because there's no progression in CrossFit. You do different shit every day. Funny thing is the competitors actually train. But what you're doing at the CrossFit box is exercise. And, most of the people at commercial gyms are doing exercise. They go in, do the same circuit of workouts, same weight, and then hop on the same cardio machine for the same time at the same speed. And, it's good exercise. Exercise is not bad. That's not what we're saying here.
And let's make that, I think that's actually an interesting comparison, right? Because chances are if you go to your average CrossFit box and you go to your average Globo gym down the street, mm-hmm. the people at the CrossFit box are going to be, more fit, a little bit more muscular, leaner, probably. Mm-hmm. That'd be my guess. That's my experience. Now, part of that is because there's always going to be a little bias here, and part of that's because people who are already good at athletics will tend to gravitate more to CrossFit mm-hmm. because they're already good at snatching and cleaning and gymnastics and all that stuff. No, but if we take that out of the equation for a moment, just set that aside. Well, CrossFit has one thing that the Globo gym doesn't have. And that's that it is pretty hard compared mm-hmm. to the general person's sort of like activity level, right? Mm-hmm. And so someone that's going on by themselves to the Globo gym to exercise is not going to choose something that's as high intensity or as hard as what the person that's going to the CrossFit box and doing whatever their workout of the day is. And so the people at the CrossFit box, if you're coming off the street and you're just kind of like an average person, their programming will get you actually probably leaner and stronger for a while. And the reason being is it's harder than it is a stress for these people. But the problem that, as we know working with CrossFit athletes that come into strength training, the problem that they often run into is that they stall out really hard. And after, 6 months or whatever, and then they're all of a sudden, they can't make any progress they can't RX their workouts. They haven't been able to get up to that point. And then we know the reason being is because they're exercising, they're not training. But that would be an exception that proves the point.
So, you raise an interesting point there. So CrossFit, and every box is different. I think that well-run boxes probably individualize a little bit better because I've had motor moron clients. Motor moron means that you're not very coordinated. That's probably the best way to put it. Not necessarily weak, you're just not very coordinated. And I've had people that do WODs that are not very coordinated, not very strong, not very fit. So not every box is the same, but in general, CrossFit favors somebody with a mediocre to high baseline.
Yep. Your former athletes in high school and stuff tend to do pretty well in CrossFit.
Yeah, it's, mediocre to high baseline, strength, endurance, coordination, etc. But at the end of the day, they're still exercising. And I think that was the idea too, because I know that's why Rip got into CrossFit like 20 years ago. He was retired from powerlifting for probably close to 20 years at that point, and he was looking for something hard that wasn't necessarily competitive. And if you kind of read some of his articles on this, he just was flaring up a bunch of old injuries, so it didn't work out too well for him. But, eventually, this kind of leads into the whole purpose of this episode, too. Is, eventually you get to a point where you just either don't have time or you just don't want to train anymore, So really, it's not like, how do we do maintenance? It's, what do you do when you just lose the desire to train, right? I think that's the better question.
Yeah. That's a whole nother question, isn't it?
It is. And I think that's the question people should be asking, not how do I maintain? It's, okay, what do I do when I don't want to train anymore? Well, that is when exercise can be very useful for an ex-trainee. So that's one problem. And I'll expand on that. The other scenario is when you get somebody who wants the results of training but wants to exercise their way there. That ain't going to happen. Yep. That is the most common general fitness / Globo Gym client that I get, is somebody who wants the results of training, wants to exercise their way to a trained body. That's not going to work. They might be willing to starve because, I think that it's overwhelmingly agreed upon that if you cut your food intake down enough, you're going to lose weight. So I don't find myself arguing with that so much. Once in a while, I get somebody that says, why are these calories so low? But it's not very common. Most of the time it's, I can't find this, or I can't follow this diet. Do I need less carbs? Do I need more protein? Do I need less protein? Do I need, organic foods? Or, I'll get random shit about how to set up the diet, but I don't really get as much pushback as maybe coaches of, 2 decades ago got when I tell people you got to starve,
Right.
And not literally starve for, the semantic people out there, but you have to restrict calories to lose weight. That part, I do pretty well with that. When it comes to the weight room side of it, there's just this false pretense that you can exercise your way to a trained body. And this is how I've seen it manifest. You get one person that may have come from a CrossFit background. And if I do what I know is probably best for them, which is, 3 days a week, maybe 4, 3 to 5 exercises, 2 to 3 barbell lifts. Well, it's not enough. That's the first thing I hear. It's not enough. So you get those people that think that more is better. They want to feel beat up, tired, and sore because they correlate that with weight loss or with, more definition or with more muscle. They correlate the degree to which they feel tired and beat up and sore. Okay. Or how much the workout burns. Why am I only doing 5? I don't care about strength. Why can I do more? So, okay, you can do 10s. So that's problem number 1 that I typically run into. Problem number 2 is, why only 5 exercises? Why only 3 to 5 exercises? This is boring. This is monotonous. Well, swimming is monotonous too. So is golf. So is playing
Walking,
the keyboard. Yeah, so is playing
treadmill.
Keyboard over there, guitar.
Right. Yeah, you want to get better at those. Boring too.
Do baseball players, go play hockey with the NHL? To get better at baseball. I mean, come on. So, I get that. This is boring. This isn't enough. Or this is boring. This is monotonous. I'm bored. This is just not fun. Well, training is not fun.
Right.
Ask any pro athlete. They love what they do. It's the thing they're the best at. It's economize their life, so they do it. And, obviously they like it enough to beat the hell out of themselves and keep getting better, but they won't tell you it's fun. Ask a NFL player if training for a game is fun. When I was a swimmer, I hated practice, but I loved the meets, the swim meets.
Yeah, well, and if you're a professional athlete, it's like, it's like I broke my pinky toe the other day. Mm-hmm. Well, so you get out there and you train. You tape it up and you go train.
Exactly.
It's like, I tweaked I strained my calf on a weird play. I got twisted weird, and then I strained, a calf muscle or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, so you go train. Like you don't. And so there's like, the other aspect of the sport. It's like these guys. That's what training is, right? Like they keep moving through the roadblocks.
Yeah. And
this morning, I'm no pro athlete. I'm even close to that, right? I'm just an average guy. But this morning, I woke up with a cold, mm-hmm. and my energy levels have been terrible all day. I feel like shit, mm-hmm. but I had to do my volume squats today. I just did them. Mm-hmm. It sucked. It was a lot worse than it is on a normal day when I feel good.
It's what you do.
But that's what I do. But that's what training is, because the program calls for that. And if I don't do it, right, I'm not introducing the stress in my workout that's going to cause an adaptation. And at my level, if I miss one workout, that messes up kind of the whole schedule for 2 weeks.
Well,
so
then,
there you go.
You get the rebuttal. Well, I don't want to compete. I don't care about competing or, lifting a bunch of weight. Well, you're barely squatting and deadlifting over body weight. So right now you have to train. You have to get stronger because, recently I sent an email out. I asked, hey, why don't you look at the guys that you want to look like and see how much a hard deadlift is for them. And I'm like, I'm not talking about them bouncing 225 off the floor 5 times and calling that a workout. I'm talking about a deadlift that was as hard as your 20 kilograms over body weight, equivalent for the guy that looks the way you want to look. I guarantee it's a lot more weight than you're lifting, So again, strength plays into this. But, that's the third thing I get. Well, why does it keep getting heavier? Well, because it's not heavy enough. Well, isn't that relative? Yeah, but there's some absolutes to consider here. And yes, in this case, it is relative. You are not even squatting and deadlifting body weight. That's not heavy enough. There are absolute and relative metrics here that matter. If you were a fat guy squatting and deadlifting body weight, that might change things a little bit, Yeah. But if you are a skinny fat person or, a mildly overweight person and you're not squatting and deadlifting more than body weight, then it's not heavy enough. It needs to get heavier. These guys that are telling you don't have to lift heavy are probably picking up 4 of you. Look at their workouts. Why are there 6 plates on each side of the bar doing deadlifts, sets of 5, Yeah. Why is that? Does that not matter? The same guy that's telling you don't have to lift heavy is lifting heavy. Well, it's relative. He's doing sets of 10. At some point, these absolutes matter. You're not going to tell me that his 585-pound deadlift for a set of 10 is the same as your 95-pound deadlift for a set of 10. It's not the same thing. Eventually, these absolutes matter too.
Yeah.
But so what did I say? First is, well, it's not enough. Then it's, why does it keep getting heavier? Why is it monotonous? It doesn't have to be heavy. Okay, so, I've done the whole, all right, well, let's pad this with some arm work and, some pull downs so we can get them to a chin up. People love getting to a chin up too. When they stick it out, they're very happy about it. So I haven't had too much pushback on that. But then I'll get the question, why are we doing the same exercises all the time? So, okay, now I've given you some variety, but then you want variety of variety,
Right.
And then, okay, well, instead of 5s, I'll give you 10s. Well, why are we doing the same exercises? Well, it's training. You're telling me that you want to look like, well, the average person, middle of the bell curve that's not into powerlifting and into lifting sports, your average Joe, like you said in other episodes, Brad Pitt in Fight Club, the guy on the Men's Fitness cover, Well, those guys have more muscle than the guy talking to us, than the trainee.
Right.
And they're probably stronger too. Just out the gate, their baseline's probably higher. So, if you want to look like that guy, you're going to have to get strong. Well, he says to exercise. Well, he's also an Anavar. Know? So that brings my next point. If you want to exercise your way to a trained body, the way that is done is with steroids. Otherwise,
that's right. And
which we're not recommending to add a qualifier.
No, not at all. And what's interesting? So there's a dude on YouTube. Someone recently introduced me to. This guy is More Plates, More Dates is his name. I don't know if you've seen him. No. But he does these like breakdowns of like Hollywood actors, and he's like, here's what, whether I think they're natty or not, and like what steroid cycle they might have been on. And I'm like, I really don't care about that. But what is interesting is he pulls up these like really early films and TV shows that these now well-known actors have been on, and he shows what they looked like back then. So he looked at Brad Pitt, for instance,
right?
And like we mentioned the famous Fight Club physique that he had.
Yeah.
He was like 36 when he did Fight Club. And then he did Troy like a few years later, but he pulled up like some films from when the guy was like 18, and he looks pretty much the same. I mean, he got a little bit more muscular, but the dude when the guy was like unknown, didn't have money, very likely was not on steroids.
I don't think he
very
was.
likely.
I mean, look at him now.
No, and he stayed. That's part of the thing is he stayed pretty much the same. Like, and he's in his 50s now.
I mean, his dad bod in his 50s is what we busted our ass for in our 20s.
Exactly. And so it's like this guy just looked like that to start with. Like he had visible abs and like really nice muscle insertions and was just a long, lean dude. So anyway, that's just kind of as an aside point. That's kind of an interesting YouTube channel just to see all these actors. But then you see the other ones who didn't look like that to begin with, and like they put on 25 pounds in 6 months, and it's all lean muscle mass.
Oh yeah, like my favorite one was Edward Norton in American History X.
Oh, right.
Claims that, I had beef shakes and protein shakes and just lifted for 3 months and added 30 pounds of muscle. Well, first of all,
I don't think so.
if you actually gained 30 pounds of muscle, which we know you didn't, because you didn't measure that in 1997, you didn't get in a DEXA, and that doesn't measure muscle mass anyway. But either way, that probably means he gained 30 pounds and looked leaner. And if he gained 30 pounds and looked leaner, then he probably took steroids. And Arnold himself contacted him to ask him what he was on, and he denied it. But he's a known elitist. He has a reputation, Edward Norton. He's the type that would, based on what I've read about him and how people have had difficulties with him in movies, he seems like the type that would deny it,
Yeah, right.
But just look at him in that movie. He's like this beefed up neo-Nazi, and he's never looked like that before, and he's never looked like that again.
Yeah, right. He was in Fight Club too, and he's like this really skinny, pale, dude. but yeah, so that's the thing, right? So there are people out there that there are Brad Pitts out there that are they won the genetic lottery and they look amazing without doing anything, just being alive. But, if you're listening to this podcast, that's not you. And it's not me. It's not you either. And so what are we going to do? Like, if you want that body composition improvement, you're going to have to train and get stronger. That's the only way you're going to get there to that physique if you don't have it naturally.
Yeah, no, to bring that back home, if you want to exercise is good for your health. But typically people don't hire me because they want the results of exercise, which is good health and maybe a little bit of novice effect, which means that you'll rapidly see improvements from doing nothing to doing something. But, if you're trying to get a dramatic transformation, and you're trying to look, if you're a skinny fat dude and you're trying to look like a fitness model, or you're a fat weak dude trying to look like a fitness model, first of all, getting you that lean, you're not going to sustain it very long. But that's a whole nother topic for a different podcast. But if you want to look more muscular and you don't naturally look muscular, you're going to have to get stronger. You have to train. Exercise won't do that. I can reduce your calories and have you exercise, and you can lose a ton of weight and have no definition. I did it before. That's how I ended up strength training, because I did that for 15 years before I started training for strength.
Right.
So that's my whole point. Like, I've exercised and done the thing that people are trying to do. Some of you are listening. I've done that thing before, where I'm doing bullshit exercise that doesn't challenge my body that much, and I feel pretty good doing it, and then I'm just dieting really hard. And what ends up happening is I lose a ton of body weight, and I look, skinny in clothes, but then I'm still, undefined. And if I can commit myself to another cut like that, which I kind of want to, I think it's good for the content I'm putting out, I'm willing to bet, I'll be that lean in the 170s this time.
Probably.
Because now I have a 525 deadlift, a 445 squat, and a 225 press, and a 310-pound bench. So my prediction is I'm probably going to be lean at an even heavier body weight, because now we have what? Since that cut, it's been 5 years now? Yeah, 5 years. 5 years of just, training and hitting PRs.
And that has been my experience. I've not really gone through many big cuts like you've done. I've done much smaller ones, 10, 20 pounds.
That's what I do now, probably, because I didn't get that fat.
I've noticed, here's what I've noticed, and I've noticed this among a lot of trainees too. So they train for the first 6 months to a year, and they see some big body composition changes because they're putting on a lot of muscle mass. And those guys that are pretty fat to begin with often will lose some noticeable inches around their waist, and then they've gained some muscle around their back and their traps and their delts and all that kind of stuff. So they look a lot better already. And then they kind of level off. They kind of look a certain way, but the lifts keep going up, and they transition into intermediate level programming, and but they keep working at it. And it's interesting. About a year later, after that initial sort of phase. So first 6 months, and then about a year after that.
Yep.
All of a sudden, what do you know? The lifts keep going up, and they're a couple percent body fat lower, and they're stronger, and their muscular definition looks better. And they train for another year after that, and it happens again. And this is without necessarily going through a dedicated cut cycle. You know what I mean? What I think is happening is that, in fact, throughout the year, they are doing kind of like small little cuts, and then they'll kind of, their eating will ramp up as their intense training intensity ramps up again to support it. And then they end up like bulking up just a little bit. And there's these sort of like little micro moves throughout the year. And then net at the end of the year, they're a little bit leaner and they're noticeably more muscular. Now, there's an end point to that, of course, like everything. After a few years of that, you're really not going to see any big body composition changes without making much more drastic moves, like doing a dedicated cut or moving up a weight class or something if you're trying to go the other direction and just get bigger. But I've noticed that in my own training. I've noticed that with a lot of trainees, and this is without purposely trying to change their body composition. They're just training for strength, and they're doing a reasonable amount of activity outside the gym, and they're doing a reasonable amount of conditioning. Like, that's it. And I've noticed that effect many times.
But they're training. They're not exercising.
They're training. That's the key. They're training the whole time. They're always trying to add. They're always trying to do a little bit harder conditioning, etc.
So I think, before we finish up, we need to address the whole point of this podcast, and that's, maintenance was the question. Well, there is no maintenance. There is, you're training or you're not training, right? You're going to if you want to maintain a good percentage of what you've acquired training, then you need to do some things. And I think that's really what we're aiming to answer here, right? Somebody asked me today, I have a client that, she was from an exercise hypertrophy, got a sweat burn background, and, I converted her partially. I had to pad her LP with other stuff, so she had 5 days of stuff to do, but she understood it and understood that it was psychology that demanded it, which made her a very good client to work with. And, then later, you get to know people. I'm like, okay, any moment now she's going to burn out at the monotony, so I better, change something here. So I'm like, let's do some tens, and let's add in some more isolation, single joint stuff. Let's, do less barbell stuff, et cetera, and then she's like, you read my mind, we're on a good roll here. So then today I was answering a question about, do you guys ever not do barbell stuff? And I'm like, well, if I remove barbell training, then it's not starting strength anymore, So I explained that, but no, anyways, this after the smart ass comment, I elaborated. I was like, you could deprioritize it. If you don't care about it, you could deprioritize it, and you can keep a good chunk of what you have. I don't know. Don't ask me for percentages. No way I can measure that, but probably more than half. If you just squat once a week, deadlift once a week, and, go by perceived exertion. I hate RPE for training, but, I think that RPE is rating of perceived exertion. You basically go by how it feels, and you try to estimate what you could have done, even though you can't really do that accurately. But from an exercise standpoint, probably fine. You could be like my brother and go in there and do 50% of your previous max for a set of 5, and you'll probably keep a good chunk of your muscle mass doing that. Like, let me think, what would that be for me? I squat at 445, so that's probably 225. If I squat at 225 to 255 every single workout, I probably wouldn't detrain from that. I'd lose my maxes for sure. But I'd probably still look like I do something, I'd probably keep enough of it. But my whole point is, these movements are functional. You're always going to squat, deadlift, press, and do some version of a chin up. Putting stuff overhead on a shelf, taking it off overhead on a shelf. That's a press and chin up. So these movements are functional. So you always want to move your joints and bones and muscles through those ranges of motion with load, so that you keep yourself functional in the world. How much load and intensity depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to train, it has to get heavier. If you have trained and you're like where I am, we're on 3 out of the 4 lifts, I just don't give a fuck about getting stronger. That said, because, I am who I am, I go in there and try to add every time. But I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying that's what I do. I go in and I'm like, well, I did this last week, I better add 5 pounds. And sometimes I accidentally hit a PR. I'm training my bench because I want 315, and I hit 310, and I missed 315 because I've neglected to fix my elbow flare for, the last...
Ooh, yeah.
I've been flaring my elbow since I was 15 and started benching. And, at one point I just, for some reason, gave up on it. And we don't really care about the bench. We're strength lifters, but, it didn't hurt me. I didn't get tendonitis from it. I'd muscle up some maximal lifts, but when it cost me the third plate that I've been chasing my entire lifting career.
You need that. Yeah.
Now I'm not. Now my bench is perfect. I've been complimented on my technique, my lifting technique by coaches and other clients and lifters alike. And even on the bench, most people don't catch what I'm doing because it's subtle. But it's enough. When it gets heavier, you see it. The elbows shoot back, the bar stops, then it tilts, and then the plates fall off, and I miss 315. Then I try it again a week later, and I get so dizzy I pass out to set the weight down because the same thing happened. It was slower. Either way, let me get back to my point here. I don't care about getting stronger, but I have to train because it's a psychological thing for me. I have to try and add. So it's made it less stressful because then I accidentally PR, but I go in, I squat Monday, 3 sets of 5, never more. If I do 10s, I do 2 sets. If I'm ambitious, maybe a third, but I haven't done 3 sets of 10 in ages.
Sure. And then so 15 to 20 reps in that range.
Yeah, something like that. And then I'll press afterwards. 3 to 5 sets of 5, depending on how ambitious I am. Usually 3 because it's less stressful mentally and I'm busy. And then Wednesday I'll do a bench press because I'm prioritizing the bench press. And then Friday, I'll deadlift 1 set of 5 and bench press another 3 sets of 5. So 6 sets of 5 on the bench throughout the week, 1 set of 5 on the deadlift, 3 sets of 5 on the squat. And then when it gets heavier, I go to triples and then singles and, I do that whole thing. But, it's not real good training. I probably need more volume to hit a PR on some of these lifts. I think the deadlift, I'll probably PR because I didn't time it right last time, and I think I had more in the tank. So I think if I time it right this time, I'll squeeze out another 10 pounds. That was probably there last time. But, if I want to, keep getting stronger at that, I probably need to do more volume, more frequency for a few months and, train it. But, at this point, for me, it's like a hybrid. It's, training, but it's not. It's kind of exercise, but it's still training, But for somebody else, like I was telling my client, I'm like, if you just want to, do something else, like, I don't know, some people pick up mountain biking or some people pick up hiking, or some people start playing basketball. Well, then just go to the gym and, do a moderate squat, for a few sets, moderate deadlift for a few sets, do some chin-ups at home when you have time, and just get the movements in throughout the week and pick the load yourself. I mean, don't do the empty bar. There's a line to be drawn there, but, self-select your load. Do something that's not going to stress you out and allow you to continue to perform the movements. That's called, now you're exercising. And if you don't want to train anymore, then you should just turn it into exercise and at least continue performing the movements in addition to whatever else you want to do, right?
Right. Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on this. One of them I think we need to save for another podcast.
Sure.
Because I think it is interesting. So yeah, I totally agree. And there's so many models. If when you hit times in your life, well, let me back up a little bit. So we have a saying that we often use as coaches that life deloads you. Mm-hmm. Right?
That's what happened to me.
A deload is simply when you have to, for whatever reason, take weight off the bar. Sometimes we do intentional deloads. We're like, hey, you know what? Some guy's getting really just torched from his training. Maybe we overshot a little bit. And we'll intentionally take some weight off the bar and take some reps down for a week. Sometimes it's involuntary. You get the flu and you get deloaded, whether you like it or not. You come back and you're going to have to work yourself back up from whenever you recover from the flu. Sometimes you move and you can't even get to your gym for 6 weeks or whatever. There's so many things that happen. You open a gym, right? Yeah, exactly. It's like the cobbler and having the worst shoes, right? Mm-hmm. The coach has the least amount of time to train. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, things will happen in life, especially the older you get and the more complex your life gets, to throw you off of training. Mm-hmm. And like we said, once you get to a certain level of advancement in your training, you're going to need a lot more work to get more progress. And if you stop doing it for whatever reason, because life deloads you, then you're gonna have to take some steps back.
Yeah.
And so often what happens in practice is that you get to a certain level of advancement that your life will support. And, if you're a normal, like most adults, most of us, we have a job, we might have kids or other family obligations. We have a lot of competing priorities going on. And so realistically, there's only so much training that we can fit into our life. Mm-hmm. And to go beyond that point, we get, problems happen. If you want to be a competitive level anything, and by competitive, let me say that a different way. definitely if you want to be a competitive level anything, but also like if you want to be elite in anything, which includes having an elite level physique, it requires a lot of sacrifice, and it's something that you may not want. Like if you want to eat the way it takes to get yourself to a like amazing physique, you might have to do things that alienate the rest of your family.
Mm-hmm.
You might have to skip out on family things and cause arguments because you got to go train. Like there is a limit to this that's practical, right?
Yeah.
So you can't progress forever, but in practice, that's what ends up happening. Maintenance ends up becoming like we're always training and we're always trying to add, but we often have other limitations that push us back a step or two, and we got to build back. Oh. And hopefully, in the long run, we always are building back a little bit further than where we were when we got knocked off, our progress. But that's something that I think is kind of funny. Like some people, I think, envision themselves, as sort of like they get really into barbell training or really into whatever aspect of fitness. And they like see themselves doing like elite level workouts and stuff. I'm like, you realize like professional athletes need like this whole ecosystem to survive. They need people to do like all their chores for them. Mm-hmm. They can't work a regular job because they're working out all day. They need enough time to sleep and be relaxed. They can't have too many outside stressors. Like they need a lot of outside peripheral support to make their life happen. That's a whole nother discussion, but these are the realistic limitations to training.
Let me add some context to that because, Trent's talking about, getting to an elite level requires all that, but for a lot of, our listeners here and a lot of commercial gym clients, middle of the bell curve folks out there, you're going to have to put that level of dedication in to get a mediocre result.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Exactly. So like for you average Joe, if you want to get down to 10% body fat, it might require elite level effort
and not look skinny. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so exactly, we're not all starting off looking like Brad Pitt. So
for me to get down to 165 and just be 11% body fat. I mean, I could have went further. I was probably about 2 to 4 weeks away from 5% because at that point, a pound, becomes more of a percentage than it was when I was fat,
right.
But just for me to get down to that required, a Herculean effort. Like I traveled, I had all my meals prepped. I'd, Airbnb, so I'd kitchen, I'd, find a gym, we found the closest gym, pay the day passes, like everything revolves around the gym. And then I was 5'9", 165 at 11.9% body fat. That's not competitive, but I had to put that same level of effort that an athlete would because I was trying to achieve a result that was greater than what I previously had.
Right. Yep.
Yep.
And you think about like the reality of that, when you're in that situation, if your girlfriend's like, you want to go on like a spontaneous date and go get ice cream. It's like, no, you can't do that at that level. If you're continuing to push, like, nope. The answer's no. And so like, what does that do to your relationships and so on, right? You already mentioned the physical effects.
Yeah.
But it's just, and so I point that out because of this. I have a problem I run into with some trainees where they'll work with me for a couple of years, 2-3 years. And it's great. And I tend to work with a lot of older guys who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. Mm-hmm. And, they hit a point where it's like, listen, to go further, to get stronger, to get that next PR, here's what we're going to have to do. And, for them, it's like your body might not hold up to that. You may not be able to come in consistently enough to the gym to achieve this. Right? Like if I'm going to put you on a block training program, it's like you cannot miss these workouts because then it blows up the whole program. I don't know if you're going to hit a PR or not. And so sometimes people get frustrated because they've been in a mindset of like progress. Mm-hmm. And it may not actually be the right decision to get the next PR. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. That's agree. Okay.
I would agree.
It doesn't mean we stop training. It doesn't mean we just, sit on our thumbs. There are other things to do, but yeah, I want to point that out because some people do that really buy into this training mindset can get frustrated, and it can be frustrating when you get to be 3-4 years into this kind of stuff, and the PRs just are hard to come by.
So this knowledge applies to two different demographics. If you're somebody who's never trained, and you are you're skinny fat, you're a 160-pound guy with, if you think you have man boobs and a little bit of belly, or let's say you're the 125-pound female in the same position, right? It's going to take you elite level effort to, have those visible abs and not, look like Skeletor.
Right.
Because a 165-pound guy with the muscle mass he has at baseline is going to have to weigh 135 pounds at 5'9", 5'10", which is not feasible. It's not healthy, not recommended. I don't think he wants to look like that. The female's going to have to weigh 100 pounds or 105 pounds, not feasible. Right. To change that, you have to increase the lean mass part of the equation, and that will take you, 1 to 2 years probably, And at the end, it's not a competitive physique. You'll look good for yourself. I liked the way I looked when I was 165, but we're not talking. The reason I'm saying that, to add context to that, is I'm not telling you that you need to train for a bodybuilding show or physique show, bikini show, powerlifting meet, etc. I'm saying that you're going to have to dedicate yourself, just like those people do, to get a result that's a fraction of theirs.
Right.
And if that's not something that you're willing to do, then you may need to reevaluate your goals and lower your expectations, because the only people who exercise and get a trained body are people who take steroids. And we all saw them in the college gym and the high school gym. They'd have these bros that would go in there and do arms and chest, and then they'd look all jacked with veins and, hard muscles that felt like a brick wall. And, I was naive, didn't know they were on shit, but that works, but we don't want you to do that. That's not sustainable. That's not healthy, and you're being a lazy ass anyway. So the trained people aren't going to respect you for it. But, that's the other thing, Hollywood actors and fitness models, they're not going into a drug-tested meet, or a drug-tested sport. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's illegal in this country, so, they might get hit with a felony if they get caught taking it, but that's the least of their worries. It's not something that's, you don't got cops cracking down on fitness models for taking steroids. It's not a priority for most police departments, but the point is, for that job, their employer doesn't give a shit how they looked like that. They just need to look like that. So,
that's right.
They're not doing anything wrong in the eyes of their job, but in the eyes of the law, depending on which state or country you live in, that might be illegal. But, my whole point is, you're going to have to put athlete level effort to change your body composition like that, and then the result may not be, a professional level result. So even though I used to think, I'm like, these guys are so huge, I just want a fraction of that, and I shouldn't have to do what they do. Well, no, you have to do what they do to get a fraction of what they have, because
that's right.
You don't have the genetics out the gate. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here reading this and listening to us.
Gosh, and there's there's so much buried behind the fact that we have to have this conversation. Part of it is the fact that people feel inadequate in the first place, not having these really stylized, exaggerated physiques that we're exposed to all day on the internet and in media. People looked at one point, people looked at Sean Connery, who, by the way, he was a bodybuilder back in the 50s. He was like an amateur bodybuilder. People looked at Sean Connery as James Bond, and he was a believable James Bond. The guy's flat stomach, got some muscle, but that guy looks pitiful compared to the Hollywood stars today when they take their shirt off. And the fact that people would look at, let's say a young Sean Connery's physique and be like, oh, that's terrible, that has a lot to say about the body dysmorphia that's so present.
Exactly.
And it's so when we're saying don't be discouraged by the fact that you may not have the genetics to get this elite looking body. That doesn't mean you can't have a really good looking body. Not at all. Yeah. And that's a whole nother discussion, the whole body dysmorphia thing. We all deal with it because we're all sort of inundated by popular media and these unrealistic images of people. But
yeah,
that's I think that's a good place to end off on. And I'm sure we'll be having this discussion over many episodes.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to summarize real quick. If you have never trained before and you're trying to get from point A to point B, more muscle and more definition than you have now, there's going to be an elite level effort required for a period of time. You're going to have to train. You're not going to exercise your way there. So sorry to burst your bubble. You're not going to hop on the treadmill and circuit train and get there. You've tried that before and it's failed. That's not going to work. Yep. If you are a trainee and you've put in, 1, 2, 3, in my case, 8 years, and you're like, man, I really don't want to train anymore. This is really bogging on me, but I don't want to, stop exercising, or I want to stop going to the gym, I should say. then you just need to, lower your standards for what you're doing in the gym, but still perform the movements, still load the movements, and then do whatever the hell else you want to do. Go ride your mountain bike. If the squat's making your hips and back too sore to ride your mountain bike, lower the weight on the squat, do less sets, and just gauge it that way. Your priorities change, right? If there's other things you want to do instead of train for strength under the bar, then you need to dial down the bar to allow you to do those other things. And that's very subjective. I can't tell you that, okay, 50% of your max, your back will be fine to run or ride a bike.
Right.
I don't know. You're going to have to try.
It's very individual.
It's very
at that
individual.
level,
The point is you're going to go by feel at that point. And at that point, you're exercising and not training. So going by feel is perfectly fine. We don't recommend going by feel if you're training. That's a whole other episode where I'll attack that, and try to clarify and make fun of a little bit. But that's my whole point. So if you need to achieve an objective, you're going to train. If you've achieved the objective and you don't know what the fuck to do, you're going to exercise.
Yep.
Or fake train like me.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. That's, in the long run, if you commit yourself to training, even if you don't have a great program, but you're consistent with it, you're going to see results in the long run.
Oh yeah.
You're going to see results. Like they will come. And, maybe along the way, you'll learn something about programming and you'll, maybe get a chance to get coached and you'll learn how to add to those results. So
excellent. All right. Well, let's wrap that up. Thank you for listening to the Weights and Plates podcast today. You can find me at weightsandplates.com or on Instagram at _Robert_Santana, or you can find the gym at weights _and_plates.
_ there, weights and plates. You can find me on Instagram, marmalade_cream. And you can shoot me an email if you want to at trent@marmaladecream.com. That's the name of my production company, but I have my email there. You can ask me questions about podcasts or weightlifting. Or, actually don't send me your diet questions. Send those to Robert. He's the real expert here.
Robert at weightsandplates.com.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But yeah, until next time.